Pundits and politicians have spent the day poring over the results of 3 by-elections, and the universal consensus appears to be that it was a pretty bad night for Rishi Sunak, but that one close race in West London offers him a very slim silver lining. Let's go through the 3 results, and we'll start with the biggest swings. This was the outcome in North Yorkshire, seat of Selby and Ainsty. Labour on 46%, which is up 21 points, 21 percentage points, a huge swing. The Conservatives on 34%, down 26 percentage points. So that is a massive swing. Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner joined new Labour MP Keir Mather to celebrate.
It's the first time we've won here. It's the first time we've overturned a 20,000 majority, the biggest majority we've ever turned over in the history of the Labour Party. Absolutely fantastic. And because I'm always saying no complacency, it's the first time ever I've been able to say, well done, Keir. Keir Mather, the MP, the new MP, fantastic.
We'll discuss Keir Mather later in the show. At 25 years old, his age has caused some controversy. For now, though, let's move on to Somerset for the next big defeat for the government. This was in Somerton and Frome. So you can see here the Lib Dems on 55. Again, a huge swing here. They have gone up by 28 percentage points. The Conservatives are down 30 percentage points on 26%. The Greens also doing pretty well, which is, I suppose, quite impressive considering there was presumably a lot of tactical voting in that seat. The Lib Dem leader joined his party's new MP, so that's Sarah Dyke, for a celebratory stunt.
What you've all been waiting for. So here we go. Let's hope it lights. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I found that very disappointing. I thought something, a bit more animated was going to come out of the cannon. But I suppose you can see why the Lib Dems do it. It gets them on the television. It means people remember that they've won a by-election. They want to seem like they are a competitive party. The relief for the government, though, came in Boris Johnson's old seat of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. We can see here the Conservatives were down 7 percentage points, but they pipped Labour to it, 45% to Labour's 44%, winning by just around 500 votes. Rishi Sunak celebrated his party's consolation prize by visiting the new Tory MP, Steve Tuckwell, in a greasy spoon.
Nobody expected us to win here, but Steve's victory shows that when people are confronted with a real choice, a choice on a matter of substance as they had here, they vote Conservative. That's what the general election is going to be about. It's going to be about actual issues that make a difference to people, and that's what we deliver in the Conservative Party. And look, when we get to that general election, what people are going to see is that I and the government and the party are going to build a brighter future for their children, for their grandchildren, and that future is going to be filled with hope, it's going to be filled with optimism, and it's going to be filled with enormous pride in our country.
So the issue of substance that he was talking about, that the election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip was fought over, was ULEZ expansion. That's a Sadiq Khan policy. We'll park that for one moment because we've got a lot more on that later. First, though, Aaron, how bad a set of results were these in total for Rishi Sunak?
Well, they were surprisingly good, weren't they? I mean, it looked like it would be a blowout, a negative blowout for the government. It looked like it would be 2 seats for Labour and 1 for Liberal Democrats. And in a sense, it was one apiece, something for everyone. So it wasn't a nightmare scenario. And I think given the trajectory of the Conservative Party in recent months, given the polling, often behind by 25 points on the Labour Party, I think winning anything is a real sucker for them. And it shows that they can still win. We'll talk, I guess, about some of the specifics with regards to Uxbridge. In many ways, still a very good result for Labour. Their best ever result in this constituency previously was 40%. Last night or yesterday, this morning, it was 43%. And that was with students not being in the constituency because of how term times are looking. Had students been in Uxbridge on ballot day, They probably would have won. We probably wouldn't be talking about you, Les. So there is something there for the Tories. And what Rishi Sunak said there in his typically ebullient 1990s children's TV presenter style was actually quite substantial. When they go on quasi right-wing issues, they are going to have a chance. And I think, frankly, if the Tories want to not lose by an extraordinary amount, they probably do need to tack right, and I think they need to make sure that they keep a significant part of their base. One other really good bit of news for them in an evening when there wasn't much was the fact that the Reform Party are just nowhere. So this idea that there is a party to their right which could get between 7 and 10% in a bunch of seats the next general election seems entirely implausible right now. If you look at opinion polls, you'll often see Reform actually above the Green Party. That's not been borne out in any local results, and that includes the 3 we saw in the last 24 hours.
I mean, in terms of the Tories doing better than expectations, there's, I suppose, a danger there in terms of sort of comparing the result with what pundits were predicting and what the parties were briefing out, and sort of objectively how it compares to historical by-elections, right? So I think in the run-up to this, Labour weren't very good at expectation management. What you want to do is get expectations down, say, oh, we'll be lucky if we win only one of them. And then that means when you win one of them, or if you win two, you can say, God, this was a massive victory. No one expected this. God, the momentum's all behind us. They kind of failed to do that this time. All the journalists sort of expected they'd win both of them. And I don't think Labour had sort of done much to try and dampen those hopes, or I suppose those predictions, let's say. But in this situation, if we ignore that sort of expectation management battle that happened over the last couple of weeks, these are really bad by-election results. So parking Uxbridge and South Ruislip because there was a local issue there, 20,000 majorities were overturned in 2 of these constituencies. So I think this was the biggest majority that Labour had overturned in a by-election since the Second World War. I think Keir Starmer said ever. John Curtis apparently said since one election in the 60s. I suppose it depends on how you measure it, perhaps. But these were huge historic losses for a sitting government.
Yeah, but you have to have lots of caveats with that. This was a Labour seat. I mean, there's been boundary changes which disadvantaged Labour, by the way. But this was a Labour seat, I believe, until 2010. Selby itself, which was a different constituency previously, or until maybe the mid-2000s. We should check that. I'm pretty sure it was 2010. So, you can come up with these numbers. But realistically, Labour would be performing well. And the reason why they didn't do the expectation management, Michael, is A, by-elections have the anti-incumbency factor anyway. Even when governments get re-elected, they tend to do quite badly in by-elections. Historically, for the last 10 to 15 years, the Liberal Democrats have been the primary beneficiaries of that with regards to the Tory party. But also, it's a strange one because the Liberal Democrats doing so well in the Southwest matters more for Labour than the Tories keeping Uxbridge. That matters more for Labour in the big picture. In terms of the blue wall, that is absolutely in free fall. So in a way I see, and I'm not being contrarian here, it is an exceptional achievement for Labour to have won the seat they did yesterday. But in terms of big macro trends, there's 2 things that need to happen for a big Labour majority. Firstly, the Tories need to do very badly in the blue wall. They appear to be doing that. Secondly, Labour need to be doing much better in Leave seats and in Scotland. Now, we didn't have a glimpse on Scotland yesterday, but what we did see with regards to where Keir Mather won is that a Leave voting seat went back to Labour in a way that was just absolutely extraordinary. When you think that the last general election was quote unquote the Brexit election, pretty fair to say that issue is dead and buried now. And that continued a pattern we saw in the local elections, where Labour actually, in terms of the local election results, they weren't amazing. They were very good, but they were outstanding in Leave voting areas, and they were just kind of okay in Remain voting areas. And actually, that's the composition you want in terms of the changes. So I think you're right to say that, Michael. This was a very bad night for the Tories, and it's a good night for Labour. It's a good night for the Lib Dems. And again, this is not being contrarian. Good night for the Greens. For the Greens in Somerton to get 10%, I know this sounds stupid, but you have to look at what happens in Suffolk in the local elections earlier this year. The Greens are starting to gobble up lots of Conservative votes in rural areas. And I think we'll actually see lots of seats now where the Lib Dems will unseat the Tories, but the Greens will be vying for second place with the Conservative Party. A very strange dynamic. If after the next general election, we have 10, 15 seats which are won by the Lib Dems and the Greens are kind of neck and neck with the Conservatives. This is in the Conservative Party heartland, and they're facing tight second finishes or maybe even third.
The Brexit point is interesting because, as you were saying, Selby was the Labour voting part of the constituency. That voted 60% to leave. So this was very much a Labour leave type place, or Tory leave type place, but, you know, very heavily Brexit voting. Labour obviously destroyed there in 2019. It does seem like the Brexit divisions have, passed us by, which is probably to be welcomed. Let's go on to ULEZ, which does seem to be the big talking point of the day, understandably so. After Labour missed out on taking back Uxbridge and South Ruislip, all eyes are on Sadiq Khan's plan to extend ULEZ, or the ultra-low emissions zone. The plan is to extend it into outer London boroughs. This was Angela Rayner commenting on that by-election result.
In 1997, when we had one of our biggest victories at that general election, we didn't win Uxbridge, so we knew it was going to be a stretch to get there. And obviously there was a local issue around the ULEZ charge and the level of scrappage for people to be able to do the right thing, and that's something we need to reflect on. But I think if you put that in the context of 13 years of Conservative failure and cost of living crisis at the moment, people were just like, we cannot accept another cost on top of that without the appropriate scrappage so that they could do the right thing. I think people acknowledge that there is a problem and we need to have clean air, and the Conservatives were the ones that started the ULEZ scheme and put us on this track. But both Labour and the Conservatives now need to really reflect on that and come up with a scheme. The Conservatives need to, while they're in government, that will help people make the right decision, because this isn't just about London. This is coming to towns and cities across the whole of the United Kingdom.
But it's Labour's mayor that has decided to extend the ULEZ scheme. Did Labour just not listen to voters on this?
Well, I think Labour is listening to voters, and the London mayor has been very clear and pushed the government to give more compensation so people can do the right thing. This isn't about giving people, you know, a charge. This is about getting green vehicles on the road so that we can bring down the emissions in London, so that we can get the health of our children in a better place. We've seen asthma and problems because of the emissions. We have to do that. What the Mayor of London's saying, and what we're categorically saying, is that we need to help people do that so that they're not penalised. And I think that's what the people of Uxbridge were saying, and that was a clear message in this by-election.
ULEZ, which was introduced into inner London by Boris Johnson when he was mayor, means drivers have to pay £12.50 per day if they have vehicles which don't meet low emission standards. And obviously, every day they drive those vehicles. Now, it's justified as necessary to improve London's air quality, which currently has toxins well above the safe level. But it's controversial because among drivers, it will hit poorer people harder. Obviously, if you're wealthy, it's very easy to get a new car. If you're poorer, it's quite difficult, and then you get slapped with that tax. And the opposition in Uxbridge and South Ruislip was so strong that even the Labour candidate spoke out against Sadiq Khan's plans. At a debate during the campaign, Danny Beales told attendees, quote, "It's not the right time to extend the ULEZ scheme to outer London. It's just not." He told the Evening Standard so a bit more detail from Danny Beales. "Something I've been saying throughout is that I don't think the support that's there goes far enough. And when you hear stories on the doorstep, we hear people who really don't face much choice about the matter. They can't afford a new car. So for them, it's, do I retire early? Do I give up my job? Do I not go and visit my family? These are the decisions people are making. And I think, as I meet all those people, they're all in favour of good air quality, but it needs to be done in a way that doesn't impact working people in the way that the current proposals do without a proper scrappage scheme." Despite the electoral setback, though, Sadiq Khan is standing by his policy.
Of course, I'm disappointed we didn't win. I welcome the 7-8% swing to Labour. I'm quite clear, though. The policy to expand the ultra-low emission zone is the right one. It was a difficult decision to take. But just like nobody would accept drinking dirty water, why accept dirty air? We know the ULEZ has cleaned the air in central London by almost 50%. What about those in outer London? And the point is, the government's given financial support to other cities in the country in their clean air zones. Why not London?
So he's saying the problem is the government aren't giving London enough for the scrappage scheme, so the scrappage scheme to help people replace their older cars with new cars. I suppose you could probably put a bit of an income threshold on that, so you're supporting people on lower incomes disproportionately. But he is saying he still wants to go ahead with the expansion. In next year's mayoral election, Calm will be facing the Tory candidate Susan Hall. She spoke to the media today.
We've had Sadiq Khan for 7 years. Everybody knows he doesn't listen to a thing that any of us want. If you look for his achievements, you'd be hard pushed to find absolutely anything. And he is absolutely adamant he'll put this ULEZ expansion in. He should not be doing that. Londoners don't want that. He should listen to Londoners.
No, it's not simple enough to say Londoners don't want ULEZ expansion. So this is polling from Redfield and Wilton published just last week. So expanding the ULEZ to all of London. So they say, to what extent, if at all, do you support or oppose this planned expansion of the ultra-low emissions zone? And then you can see, it turns out that net support for this is plus 15%. So 29% of people support it, 18% strongly support it. So in total, there's a majority who support it. Now, the support is much higher in inner London. In inner London, the ULEZ zone already covers. But even in outer London, it shows that it's even. So just as many people oppose it as support it, although, as you can see there, strong opposition is quite a lot larger than strong support. So I suppose you could say there that outer London residents, on balance, probably don't support this. If you look at the whole of London, though, again, with a different question. So if a different question is asked, it makes the ULEZ expansion seem actually less popular than the data we're showing you here. So the same poll asked people, in your view, which would you prefer? And then they've got these options. The ultra-low emissions zone to be kept to its current inner London boundaries, and 37% of people said that was their favoured option. The ultra-low emissions zone be expanded to include the entirety of London, so that's ULEZ expansion. That got 32%. And then the ultra-low emissions zone to be scrapped entirely, that got 22%. So you can see there, the most popular option by far is to keep it as it is. And there is a majority for either keeping it as it is or scrapping it altogether. So when the question is posed in that way, ULEZ expansion doesn't seem that popular. So why is Sadiq Khan pushing for this now? Well, obviously, the argument he's making, which I think is very valid, is that this isn't about politics, this is about public health, and this is ruining children's lungs, giving people asthma, threatens cancer, etc. So he's got a good argument there. Politically, though, why now? And I think probably here, what's worth noting is that often things such as this, sort of measures which are damaging for certain car drivers, are very, very controversial as they're being introduced. And then afterwards, the controversy dies down after people get used to it and see, oh, the sky hasn't fallen down, and actually, it's a nicer city to live in. Some examples of this, or some evidence for this, let's say, the implementation of the initial wave of ULEZ was controversial, just as its expansion has been, but it's not any more. So this is from the same pollsters, Redfield and Wilton. Transport for London currently charges a daily £12.50 to drivers of cars, motorcycles, vans, etc., etc. To what extent, if at all, do you support or oppose the existence of the ultra-low emission zone ULEZ in London? Now, in this case, 26% strongly support it and 32% support it. People who oppose it is just 10% who oppose and 14% who strongly oppose. So 24% of people oppose it, and in favour of it, an overwhelming majority. So once it's in place, people say, oh yeah, that's good. Well, we should keep that. So it might be that Sadiq Khan wants to rush this through in time that people can get used to it before the next mayoral election happens. As for another issue involving cars, which often seems very controversial, but apparently is not really when you ask people. These are the results when it comes to low traffic neighbourhoods. So what they told their respondents, low traffic neighbourhoods places bollards and other obstacles to prevent vehicles from entering certain streets in order to allow for more space for pedestrians and cyclists. And then they ask, to what extent, if at all, do you support or oppose the introduction of low traffic neighbourhoods in London? And then here the support is overwhelming. So 24% strongly support, 34% support, neither 21%. And then people who actually oppose it is tiny. So strongly oppose 10% and oppose 7%. So only 17% of people oppose low traffic neighbourhoods. Now that's despite channels such as GB News trying to make this a real hot button issue. They're not managing, because once people live in low traffic neighbourhoods or know of one close to them, they sort of recognise actually these things are quite good. Lots of people are discussing the idea that maybe This should be a warning to people sort of introducing certain kinds of green policies that can backfire. What do you make of it?
Well, they can backfire. Of course they can backfire. Any policy can backfire. It's important to say that this particular initiative isn't actually being rolled out, as I understand it, Michael. I'm not a Londoner anymore, but it's not until August this year. And frankly, a lot of people are under the misapprehension that it will target them. As I understand it, around 9 in 10 drivers won't be impacted by this in the sort of donut surrounding central London. So there's that aspect to it. You know, like you said, people are more critical and skeptical of policies before they're rolled out. There's a misunderstanding about quite how many people are going to be hit by it. But I'd also say on the thing you said about LTNs, for instance, I think people in the abstract like cycle lanes. In the abstract, they like LTNs. In the abstract, they'll support traffic calming measures. Of course they do, often very strongly. If you have speeding cars going down your road, you'll want speed bumps and so on. That's not a left-right issue. That's just a big chunk of society supports those kinds of measures. But then when you get into the specifics, it can be quite hard. So, I wouldn't say there's definitely consent out there for every LTN purely because, you just showed something there. Around 55 to 60% of people strongly support LTNs. There's different kind of initiatives. And what I would say is, here's a big takeaway from me, Michael, is that we saw a bunch of initiatives rolled out after the COVID crisis. And they were embraced enthusiastically by a number of councils. And often they were done in a very half-assed way, very badly. I live in Portsmouth. There was a cycle lane introduced by the Liberal Democrat-controlled council here, done very badly. It was highly ineffective. I cycle. I wouldn't want to cycle down it. Drivers were pissed off. Businesses were pissed off. Cyclists weren't getting a particularly useful asset. And what that did was, by trying to force it on people and by failing, you undermined really broader efforts to embed and to enlarge active travel. Because when you do these kinds of things, whether it's parklets, whether it's cycle lanes, whether it's LTNs, you want to do it effectively. People look at it and go, wow, that is so good. We should have more of that. A great example is the congestion charge in London under Ken Livingstone. It was done so well that very quickly all the sort of misgivings were allayed. Or the pedestrianisation on the north side of Trafalgar Square. People might not know this, but Trafalgar Square used to be a traffic island just outside the National Gallery. Cars would go past and whatnot. And that was done so well and so impressively that people took a step back and said, you know what, I was wrong. The problem is when you don't do that, you don't just fail to implement a policy that you want to implement effectively, you also allow your opponents to double down. See, I was right. I knew I was right. I knew they were wrong. So people who want LTNs and active travel measures, like you, like me, like most people who are progressively minded, we also need to understand that doesn't mean you back every single last LTN. Often it means actually being quite strategic and taking people with you. Now, the question is, with regards to this ULEZ measure around the periphery of London, have Labour taken people with them? I think the polling indicates that they've taken enough people with them, but it's still, you're not looking at massive majorities. And it does raise a broader question, Michael, in regards to decarbonisation. Who bears the costs of a post-carbon city? Who should bear the costs? Should it be government or should it be the individual consumer? Should it be businesses? Should it be the 1%? And I sometimes feel like measures like this, I support ULEZ, of course I do. It's been fantastic in central London. But sometimes measures like this can be counterproductive. And I can only think of, for instance, the protests in regards to Macron and the Gilets jaunes and where they came from, really. That was also about a sort of a green agenda initially. And it's not something we want to do on the left. We do not want to start a culture war around green issues. We do not want to start saying this is a left-coded thing, because that's not necessarily a majority of society, or where it is, like in places like London, it's not a supermajority. So that's unwise. We need to take people with us.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We don't want climate change to be particularly polarized, actually. In the United States, the reason why climate policy, Joe Biden's done pretty well, actually, in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act, but why no country is going to have much faith in the Americans when it comes to any kind of international agreement is because, on climate, they're doing okay now under Joe Biden. I know people are critiquing him for opening a couple of pipelines, absolutely valid critiques, but also they do seem serious about climate change, right? They're investing lots of money in a green transition. But it could quite easily be the case that next year Donald Trump wins the presidency and then it's a completely different situation because there is no consensus across the parties in the United States that everyone's trying to get towards net zero. Now, at the moment, it's hanging by a thread, but at the moment, there is still a consensus across the political parties that we should get to net zero. They disagree on how to do it. And lots of people have been critiquing Rishi Sunak, again, very justifiably, for not really putting his money where his mouth is. But the idea of getting to net zero isn't yet a politically polarized position. Again, the likes of GB News are really, really trying to change this, really, really trying to politicize net zero, as are the right of the Conservative Party. But we don't want that to happen. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, because I'm generally very in favour of Just Stop Oil, but obviously I'm in favour of what they want, and I have a lot of respect for this idea that you put yourself in harm's way to get attention for your cause. My one concern is, what if this helps to polarise the issue, which is a danger. It's potentially outweighed by the benefits of doing it, but a danger of the Just Stop Oil type tactics is that it helps polarise the issue, and then you do get a Conservative Party which is really anti-climate action, and then we sort of just switch between two different policy positions when it comes to climate, when what you want is some sort of consensus. Sticking to this issue of Uxbridge and South Ruislip and sort of the fallout within the Labour Party, apparently right-wingers, in the Labour Party of course, have found someone other than Sadiq Khan to blame for not winning in the constituency. I'll give you a moment to guess who. Who do you think they might be haranguing? This time it's not Jeremy Corbyn. This is from Patrick Maguire. Anyone still hoping against hope that Labour's green policies are making it to an election intact will not be encouraged by the number of Starmer allies privately taking the name of Ed Miliband, not actually involved in Uxbridge at all, by the way, in vain this morning. So lots of people telling this Times journalist the problem is Ed Miliband. Rachel Weirmouth, or Rachel Kearsmouth, is what many people call her because she tends to be a mouthpiece for Keir Starmer and his allies in the party. She's a journalist at The New Statesman, and she tweeted this: "You have to ask if the job of Ed Miliband, Sadiq Khan chaired Ed Miliband's leadership campaign in 2010. Now, that is a tenuous link, if I ever read one. So she says, you have to ask if the job of Ed Miliband as Shadow Climate Change Secretary would now be safe in any Labour reshuffle. There have been rumblings about his move for a while. I don't think the Uxbridge result will make them quieter." You have to ask, don't you? This is code for I've been WhatsApped by a number of people who want me to say this. This was an interesting take from Alan Wager, someone who I think is more an objective observer when it comes to Labour Party politics. He's an academic at Queen Mary University. Like it or not, ULEZ will be seen as a parable of how radical policy popular with the left could completely derail Labour in an election campaign. Very useful for Starmer ahead of the National Policy Forum this weekend. So the National Policy Forum, where different bodies within the party, different representatives within the party sort of hash out a basis for the next manifesto. Again, I think sometimes these things are overstated because you can get something agreed in the National Policy Forum, which is then completely ignored when it comes to writing the actual manifesto, but not completely irrelevant. And for his part, Keir Starmer seems happy to stick the knife in publicly. He told journalists this today: "We knew that ULEZ was an issue. That's why we lost in Uxbridge. We all need to reflect on that, including the mayor." So he is pointing his finger, not very subtly, at Sadiq Khan. Now, we could say this is just Starmer's single-minded focus on electability talking, or it could be a case of tit for tat. Now, this is an Evening Standard headline from 3 days ago. "This policy should be changed. Sadiq Khan weighs in on Labour two-child benefit cap row." And then you can see the subheading here. "The London mayor said he will be lobbying Sir Keir Starmer to abolish the cap, but that he understands why the party leader is refusing to make the change." Reporting around these kinds of things, Aaron, I think it tends to just be factions within the party trying to get journalists to report what they're saying. But there is obviously a lot of manoeuvring to try and say, because Labour have lost, well, they didn't win South Ruislip and Uxbridge, that's a reason for the party to shift to the right and dump all the green crap. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm sure that there's lots of people around Starmer who talk in those literal terms, Michael. It's very, I think people don't realise this. The extent to which the Labour Party has bought into a green agenda is very new, right? Even under the Corbyn leadership, a majority of Labour MPs were voting for an extra Heathrow runway. Like, this is the party. And I think a lot of people have this recency bias. I think the party's always been green and progressive and cares about, no, socially liberal and no. It's very possible, actually, that rhetorically, the next Labour manifesto is rhetorically less green than the Tory manifesto in 2019. Now, Keir Starmer would say, well, that's because I don't want to talk about it too much and just deliver. Fine, you can say that. But I don't think anybody saw that coming a couple of years ago. Michael, we could go through all those stories. I mean, Rachel Keir's mouth is just, that was, you can almost see her sort of WhatsApping whoever it was, Pat McFadden or somebody from the Labour right, Wes Streeting or God knows who, Luke Akehurst. How should I write it? What's a good formulation? What do you think? Important to say, Michael, Sadiq Khan is, alongside Andy Burnham, the most successful Labour politician right now in the country, as well as Mark Drakeford. He's won the mayoral election twice. Now, you might say, well, it's London, so what, big deal? Labour politicians have lost that many times, both to Boris Johnson and Ken Livingstone. So the idea that you take it for granted as a sort of Labour city is somewhat misjudged. So the idea that, Sadiq Khan's a loser, Keir Starmer shouldn't be associated with him. Well, hang on a second, he's won a Democratic vote twice. He'll do so again quite soon, one imagines. So I find that rather annoying, irritating, but there are lots of daggers at Fred Miliband, and frankly, I can't see him staying in that position as soon as it becomes expedient for somebody out there. You know, the GMB union hates the guy. They want him out. The Labour right want him out. So Keir Starmer will say, we lost in Uxbridge because of you, lads. But he won't say in 2019 we lost because of my Brexit position. It's annoying. It's hypocritical. I find the man deeply unlikable. But anyway, that all said, he's probably the next Prime Minister. What does that say about how politics works in this country, Michael?
After the Tories held Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Keir Starmer wasted no time in blaming Sadiq Khan, and headlines like this could be found on basically all the news websites, so we've chosen The Guardian here. Starmer urges Khan to reflect on ULEZ rules after Uxbridge defeat. By all accounts, it does seem like ULEZ expansion was unhelpful for Labour on Thursday, but there's a problem with Starmer's critique. He's not just disagreeing with Sadiq Khan, but also with himself. From just 2 weeks ago, he spoke on the topic in a call-in session with Nick Ferrari on LBC.
There's a legal obligation on the mayor to take measures in relation to air pollution. So he doesn't just have a free choice to decide what he does here. He's got to take action. The first ULEZ, actually, the very first one, was introduced by a Tory mayor. But he's got to take action because the law says he's got to take action. I think the question then, Tony, that I would say is, how can we help you on the money side? And that's where I think there is a scrappage scheme in place where people get assistance to scrap and change their vehicle. It's only £2,000. And, you know, the government, Tony, has given money to Portsmouth, to Bristol and to Birmingham to help, because we know it impacts on people. They haven't given a penny to London, and therefore the mayor is asking the government to stump up some more money so that people like you aren't footing the bill. I know, Tony, that still hurts in a sense in your pocket, you know, week after week after week.
Is Danny Beales right to oppose it?
Look, Danny is right to stick up for what he hopes will be his constituents. Obviously, there's a by-election there in 2 weeks.
So do you support the rollout on August the 29th?
Look, I accept that the mayor has no choice but to go ahead because of the legal obligation on him. I think Dan is right to stick up for his constituents, and
So you do support the rollout on August 29th?
I understand the pain it's going to inflict.
No. Sorry, the question was, do you support the rollout?
I don't think there's an alternative, Nick.
So, I mean, that wasn't exactly a glowing endorsement of the policy, was it? That was Keir Starmer saying that Sadiq Khan has no choice to do it because of his legal obligations. He's also saying we need more money for the scrappage scheme, so to compensate people who have to change their car. So it wasn't him saying, I love ULEZ, and now saying, I hate ULEZ, but it was him backing Sadiq Khan and now appearing to pretty much blame Sadiq Khan. 2 months earlier, though, he was on the same show answering another question about ULEZ, and he sounded a bit more passionate about it this time. He brought up a visit to the Francis Crick Institute in London and said this: "They blew up for me an incredibly detailed photograph of a lung with very dark marks on it, which were all the air pollution from our roads, which were causing cancer in that and many other patients. It's worth us all just asking ourselves, if we are not prepared to do these sorts of schemes, what are we going to do? If increasing numbers of people and young people as well are getting cancer, I have to say, when I saw the photograph, they said there are dark areas that are lung cancer because of it, air pollution. We can't just sit that out." Aaron, those are pretty inspiring words about the need for ULEZ expansion, stopping lung cancer in young people. What do you make of? I suppose Keir Starmer would argue it isn't a full U-turn because he's saying we need to reconsider it now that the voters have spoken out. I mean, he often says, you know, if you use an election, you've got to listen to the voters. You can't tell them they're wrong. I suppose, my first question for this, is this a U-turn from Keir Starmer? Can we call this a U-turn?
It's not Keir Starmer U-turning, Michael. It's Keir Starmer being Keir Starmer. He's saying, we can't just sit this one out. And now he's lying down for 8 hours straight. So it's typical Keir, Michael. It's typical Keir. When something goes right, it's up to him. Well done, Keir Starmer. Sir Keir, well done. Plaudits galore. When something goes wrong, it's somebody else. And I didn't say that. What are you talking about? In opposition, it's working, right? In government, when you're the PM, I think there's a lot more scrutiny on you. So, as an approach, it's not really going to be sufficient for the top job. He is right to say that air pollution has devastating public health consequences. I think about 50,000 people a year die in this country because of air pollution. It's actually one of the biggest killers worldwide, often because of the fuels that people use to cook and warm their homes in the global south. But the quality of air is a massive, massive killer. And that's not really in the political conversation. What he said about the sort of legal obligations, however, that is partially true. So he said about the ULEZ, for instance, in Portsmouth. There you've got the local Liberal Democrat council leader saying actually he doesn't support it, even though he's implemented it. But he can't get rid of it because there are legal obligations that the council needs to adhere to. So that bit is true. I'm very happy to be very critical and skeptical of Mr. Starmer, but on the legal obligations side, that is true. On the public health stuff, he's just done the typical Sir Keir U-turn 180.
I know you can't drive like me, Aaron, but as someone who lives in Portsmouth, I mean, can you shed any light on this idea that we're hearing from Labour politicians at the moment that the government were sort of happy to give a grant to Portsmouth Council to try and fund a scrappage scheme, and they haven't been willing to do the same in London? I mean, I suppose the implication when I hear that is that they kind of want to damage Sadiq Khan because he's a high-profile Labour figure, but I'm not sure if it's as sinister as that. I mean, has the backlash to ULEZ been strong in Portsmouth?
Well, you'd have to ask my wife. She's a councillor, and not me. I'm not in politics, but no, not especially. The ULEZ is primarily because, of course, it's a port city, and you have a great deal of emissions coming from marine cargoes rather than cars. We have an old banger. We don't fall under the ULEZ charge. My dad, when he was coming in to see me, he goes, "Oh, you've got, this," and it sort of speaks to the Uxbridge thing, right? "Oh, you've got ULEZ. Oh my God, what do I have to pay?" "Oh, I don't have to pay anything." "Okay, fine, great. What a great idea." And I'm sure that's the case for many people in Uxbridge who are, up in arms, furious, voted for the Tories in the recent by-election, and the thing will come in August, and they'll realise it doesn't affect them, and then 6 months later the air's cleaner, and they'll go, "It's quite a good initiative. I'll vote for Labour in the next general election. It wasn't so bad after all." So yes, I think the Portsmouth thing is partly, which is what you're insinuating here, Michael, partly politicking and trying to isolate a political opponent, i.e. Sadiq Khan in London, but also air quality in places like Southampton, Portsmouth is particularly bad because of the maritime industries.
I think that point as well about what you said about your dad is why I think Sadiq Khan, because lots of people say when it comes to these anti-car policies, and they are anti-car policies, I support anti-car policies, is that they haven't done enough consultations, they haven't brought people with them. But I actually think, and I say this, from my experience, which is of Waltham Forest, where I'm from, and of Hackney, where I live now, actually sometimes councillors just saying, "We're doing it, deal with it," and then sort of saying a year or two down the line, "See, we were right," has worked quite well. I know in Waltham Forest, the protest there were against, it was called Mini Holland in Walthamstow, were huge, massive protests, sort of stopping the whole high street, really big popular campaign against Mini Holland. The council member, who is not a lefty, I think in the CLP, all the left wingers are not keen on this guy, but the council member who was sort of leading on this issue was very thick-skinned when it came to these protests and just said, "No, I'm doing it." And fair play to him. It's now been in place for years, and everyone says, "Oh, it's quite nice actually, isn't it?" So once it happens, people are much more willing to accept it than they are to say, "Yes, let's do it." So I can see the benefit on sort of pushing through these anti-car measures and then waiting to show people the consequences instead of trying to persuade them beforehand, which I think can be difficult. That's why it's often done sort of maybe a year after an election so that people can see the results before the next one. Maybe Sadiq Khan has done this dangerously close to his next election. I suppose maybe he didn't want it to be in the manifesto. Rob Hogg with a $5 on Super Chat says, what should have caused controversy about Keir Mavor as a Labour MP isn't his age, but his background working for the CBI, so the Confederation of British Industry. We shall be discussing that in our next and final segment. After Thursday's by-elections, 3 new MPs will enter Parliament, and particular attention has been focused on Labour's Keir Mavor, who at 25 will be the Commons' youngest member. This is how Tory MP Johnny Mercer welcomed the news.
I think it's always good to get new people in politics. I mean, I think we mustn't become a sort of repeat of the in-betweeners, right? So I think you've got to have people who've actually done stuff. Well, this guy has he's been at Oxford University more than he's been in a job. You put a chip in him there and he just relates Labour lines. And the problem is people have kind of had enough of that, right? They want people who are authentic, people who've worked in that constituency, who know what life is like, understand what life is like, to live, work and raise a family in communities like theirs. So no, I'm afraid I don't agree with this style of politics. It's exactly why people like me didn't vote before the 2015 election, because you've got people with nothing to do with the constituency just dropped in and put a chip in them and they'll start parroting Labour Party politics. Good for me, because I don't think people are going to vote for it, right? So I mean, he says there's no love for Keir Starmer. I love Keir Starmer. I think he's fantastic because people can't stand him on the doors. They don't know what he stands for, and none of them are going to vote for him. So I'm, good on Keir. Let's keep going.
So I think there was undoubtedly a lot of cope there, right? Labour have just overturned a 20,000 vote majority in Selby and Ainsty. So it's an odd moment to suggest no one will vote for the likes of Keir Mavor. No one will vote for the likes of Keir Starmer. I think the evidence doesn't necessarily agree with you, Johnny Mercer. As for whether this newly elected MP is identikit, though, these were the kind of answers that so infuriated Johnny Mercer.
Well, obviously this is a historic night for the Labour Party. It's the largest majority we have ever overturned. I'm so incredibly proud and privileged to be elected as Member of Parliament for Selby and Ainsty. But the hard work starts now, and I can't wait to deliver for all of those people who voted Labour for the first time, but for everyone in this constituency who deserves a fresh start.
And you're going to have to back that victory up now with words and deeds on the streets of Selby and Ainsty.
Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to proving what a hard-working Labour MP can do for people in Selby and Ainsty after 13 years. We've never won the seat on these boundaries, and I just can't wait to get on with delivering an energetic and determined campaign to really improve people's lives.
And you're going to be the youngest MP.
Yes, and I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic.
Thank you.
So I think all of those answers could have been written by ChatGPT-3. I mean, maybe ChatGPT-2. It didn't seem particularly sophisticated. It wasn't especially inspiring. To be fair to him, of course, he's only 25, probably a little bit nervous. So you don't have to give a passionate, inspiring speech after you've been elected. I don't think that counted as one. It does also seem that Mavor is someone committed to towing the party line.
You've said that we might be on track to a Labour government. Mm-hmm. Would you support that Labour government in its current policy of a 2-child benefit cap?
I support the Labour government in that policy. I think we're going to inherit an absolute economic mess from the Conservatives when we take power. We're going to have to make extremely difficult decisions once we do, and I support the Labour government in doing so 100%.
Aaron, he doesn't seem particularly independently minded, but I suppose does that matter? I suppose, probably would have been helpful when Corbyn was leader if more people got elected and then, in their first interview said, I back Jeremy Corbyn's policy. Of course I do. I want them to be the government. Whereas they actually ended up having a bunch of people elected in by-elections who, when they were interviewed, said, no, I'm a Labour MP, but I don't necessarily back the leadership. I mean, is it a problem to have? I mean, I think we probably can say identikit candidates who seem to toe the party line. Should we mind?
You make a really good point, Michael, which is the leader has a democratic mandate in terms of their policy prescriptions and platform, and their MPs need to get behind them, and that's how that's how our system operates in this country. Look, I think Johnny Mercer, yes, you're right to say it was a lot of cope going on there, Michael, but he's also right to say that this new MP was in Oxford for longer than they've been in the jobs market. This is really astonishing, Michael. Now, I have no aversion to young people being MPs. We've spoken many times about Mhairi Black, fantastic parliamentarian, but that is a real problem. And the only jobs he's had after leaving Oxford are working for Wes Streeting and the disgraced Confederation of British Industry, the CBI. So it is a concern. It is a worry. And I think as an individual, he hits a real sweet spot as an identikit politician. I don't know the chap, Michael. Keir Mavor may be a wonderful human being. He may be Britain's Martin Luther King. I have no idea. Okay. I think it's wise to generally judge people on the basis of their character and what they do and their actions rather than their words. And we've not had time to do that yet with Keir Mather. But what I would say is that, you know, he's from the constituency, but this is somebody who I think he's won partly because he's just very inoffensive, right? You know, he's not overbearing. He's not too macho. He's also clearly on it. He's clearly, he can actually talk and communicate, unlike the Liberal Democrat candidate in Somerton, who literally couldn't string a sentence together in one of her first interviews with The Guardian. So he's on it. He's inoffensive. He's not overbearing. Fine. That's fine. That's all good. I'm happy for him. But is that the skill set that we need in terms of A, being a tribune for people in Parliament, B, being one of the 650 legislators who's best placed to fix this country's problems? Generally speaking, I don't think so. That's not a comment on Keir Mather. Again, like I say, I don't know the guy. But we have a lot of MPs who have done a Master's in Public Administration, who worked for the CBI, who were a party staffer. We need fewer MPs like that. And to that extent, Johnny Mercer's right. And in his defense, you know, he's putting his money where his mouth is, which is he's had a relatively unconventional entrance into public life and politics. You know, he didn't do a degree. He was in the military. I know it's relatively conventional for the Tory party, but he's not towed the line on a bunch of issues. Now, that raises a few points. On the one hand, we like that. We like dissent. That's good. But equally, you can't just have 650 people in Parliament all disagreeing with each other all of the time, because you'll accomplish nothing. That's why we have the whip system. That's why we have the party system. You need a measure of discipline and collective organisation in order to solve problems democratically. So I think Johnny Mercer's touched on something that's quite important sociologically and the composition of parliamentarians in this country. But I think if you take his logic to its conclusion, it basically means you have a permanently chaotic sort of political system. He's clearly been influenced and infused by this idea of populism, you know, like elites shouldn't necessarily be entirely coherent, and you need people who come up from the bottom and challenge that. Great, I agree with that. But politics can't just be that. Politics can't just be people like him sitting back, you know, looking like that Paul Whitehouse comedy sketch of an 80-year-old man, and then and I was very, very drunk. That's Johnny Mercer in 30 years' time. Politics can't just be those people, okay? It also needs to be people who are sometimes agreeable, are willing to compromise, and are willing to work with others who, you know, they might not agree with them on everything. So something to what he's saying, which I would very rarely say about Johnny Mercer, but equally, I don't think he's put much thought into this, which is often the way with old Plymouth Johnny.
You mentioned there the other candidate or one of the other candidates who's one of the other new MPs, probably, I should say. And this is the Lib Dem winner in Somerton and Frome. She's called Sarah Dyke. And as you said, Aaron, she's not amazing at interviews. She gave this unfortunate interview to The Guardian during the election campaign.
People have an idea from the outside that this is quite an affluent part of the world, right? And that's not the whole truth at all, is it?
Yeah, there is obviously that it does have a look of affluence in the area. I mean, it's a beautiful area. We're very, very lucky to live in this part of the world. But there are pockets of deprivation, and there's. It's okay. Take your time. Blocking. Take your time, don't worry. Excuse me, because I'm just having my coffee as. Don't worry.
I thought I shouldn't have had the extra shots.
Yeah, no, it's just because I've drank coffee far too quickly, because I haven't had a coffee since about 7 o'clock this morning.
The coffee is strong as well.
Right. What do you want to know? A subject that I don't know anything about. I'm not going to be able to give you an answer for very sensibly. Or
what on the sort of general economic state of the constituency?
Well, I can talk. Yeah, I mean, there's pockets of deprivation. I mean, what else? What can we say on that? Really, I don't feel that I'm prepared at all for this, Amy. It's all getting a little bit above my station. Sorry.
But you're about to stand in a by-election.
Yeah.
You're going to get much more exacting questioners than us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is day two of.
Let's just get you a glass of water.
Yeah.
Can stop it.
Right, I'm a bit thrown now because we weren't here to gotcha anyone and ask particularly troubling questions. Right, they were all quite open questions, but one day after the Lib Dems campaign launched, their candidate is very shaky and hasn't got her answers to pretty obvious things worked out.
I mean, John Harris was right. That wasn't a very tough line of questioning. I mean, he was basically feeding her. It seems like a very wealthy constituency, doesn't it? But not everyone here is rich. She says, what else can I say? There are pockets of deprivation. I really don't want to talk anymore. Aaron, I suppose, I mean, to play devil's advocate here again, right? So what we've seen here elected is one identikit politician who's very well prepared, masters in public policy or whatever it is, public administration. And then you've got someone who seems less prepared. Do we have to choose between one or the other? Do we either have to have sculpted MPs who have been trained very effectively, or people who are a bit incompetent and don't answer questions very well? I mean, are we trying to have our cake and eat it if we say we don't really want either of these things?
No, I think that's a bit daft. Look, I criticise Keir Mather for a bunch of things, but he's clearly, he can complete sentences. Okay, that should be the sort of bare minimum. Again, we have to remind ourselves we have 650 people in this chamber representing 68 million of us. They should be able to complete sentences. Sounds like she was having a panic attack. I don't know, because the coffee was too strong or whatever. Just say that. But the way she relayed it was just so weird, wasn't it, Michael? Yeah, there are pockets of deprivation. What else do you want to know? You're standing for Parliament. He's a political journalist. He wants to know lots of things. What a crazy thing. Let's just get rid of, why even have democratic elections? Just pick somebody. They can, what else? What the fuck do you want to, why are we even here? Why are we even having the vote? Why are we spending millions of pounds on this process? It's insane. But Michael, I think, again, to our audience, to our listeners, to our viewers, many people in politics aren't very political. I know it's a really strange thing to say and hear, but it's true. And especially in the sort of hyper-local politics of the Liberal Democrat Party, lots of people are councillors. They have no politics. The Liberal Democrats are the most anti-political, apolitical party in this country. They have no politics. They just believe in installing bollards and misleading bar charts. Those are their primary political commitments. I'm being sarcastic, apart from the bollards thing. And eventually they sort of get elevated into Parliament. And people love the lobby, love to attack the other side. So Tory journalists bash Labour MPs, Labour journalists, The Guardian, the BBC, they bash the Tories. I'll be totally honest with you. The Liberal Democrats, in terms of actual people pushing their weight and actually doing stuff and having a faintest idea what they're doing in Parliament, the Lib Dems the worst of the bunch. They are coasters, and they talk about local people, localism, precisely because it's a license to not be political, to not talk about the big problems. So this one was very much a Liberal Democrat candidate for me. I think it's far more likely to hear that kind of response from a Lib Dem than it is from a Tory or a Labour politician. And the reason why they get away with it, Michael, is whenever the Tories screw up, there are a bunch of seats, southwest of England, Scottish Highlands, historically certain sort of suburbs of major cities, university towns and cities, where they're just the second option, right? So if you don't like Labour and it's time to get rid of the Labour person, well, you're not going to vote for the Tories, so you vote Lib Dem. And if it's time to get rid of the Tory person, as it was the case in Somerton and Frome, well, Labour aren't going to win, so I'm going to go for the Lib Dems. So you have this bizarre convergence of anti-politics. On the one hand, localism. On the other hand, you tell Labour voters the Tories can't win here, so vote Lib Dem. You tell Tory voters Labour can't win here. It's a fucking mess. The Lib Dems are the party who identify the most with electoral reform and proportional representation. Ironically, they are the symbol of how dysfunctional first past the post can be, and just how nonsensical a third party is when you have effectively a two-party system. I look at somebody like this, I listen to that interview. My God, Michael, we need PR, because I really doubt under proportional representation, somebody like that becomes a member of Parliament. I really think it's significantly harder This is a really big outgrowth of how dysfunctional our electoral system is.
Don't do down bollards, Aaron. I think as is clear from my interventions on tonight's show, I'm very in favour of pedestrianisation, and sometimes that requires a fair few bollards. So if the Lib Dems want to put up more bollards, I'm all for it. Let's wrap up there. Thank you everyone for joining me tonight. Have a fantastic weekend. We will be back on Monday. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.